Hello and welcome to the Circularists. Welcome, Zoe Gilbertson. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. You are a fashion ecologist and a textiles systems designer. Is that right?
Yes, yes, yeah.
And you've been exploring sustainable fashion for 25 years. So, where many have come newly to this sort of party, you've been at this. You were one of the earlier people to call the alarm on the fashion industry. You've designed for major brands, you run your own business, you teach courses, and you design for innovation. So you wear many hats. Over to you. What have I missed from that introduction? What would you add?
I guess I could give a bit of context to my background. So I studied fashion in the mid 90s, and because I grew up in a household which was quite aware, my father started the fair trade movement in the UK. So I went off to do fashion, which was probably against what my parents would have wanted me to do. They just were not interested in that. But through studying, by the time I got to third year and I got to do my final collection, I understood there was a lot wrong with the fashion industry back then, and so I looked into more ecological materials. So I researched sustainable organic cotton, and so I was sponsored by Tencel, which was considered a new ecological material back then. So created a collection using organic cotton and tencel, and I found some eco-coated nylon. I'm not sure what that was, but that was sent to me. And yeah, created this sort of luxury sportswear collection, because I also decided that I wanted to do functional apparel. I thought that would be more useful to the world, and went off to design for Adidas, which was a brilliant experience, and then went to Vancouver to work for an outdoor brand who was very sustainable. So we did a lot of local manufacturing. We were a big outdoor retailer across Canada. We worked with Patagonia and Nike on developing organic cotton systems. We developed recycled fleece back then. So yeah, it was really exciting to explore all of those things. And I used to think that the system was possible to change and that you could sort of green fashion. But I guess I've learned over the years that since that time, the volume of production has got so great. It's just huge. And most of that is down to polyester use and fast fashion. And even though people are much more aware about the issues in climate, the situation is so much worse than it was, say, 30 years ago. So it's quite difficult to know where to focus
Right.
your attention in this system.
With such a huge, when facing
Mm.
such a huge, colossal problem, right? I want to just touch on a few things here, Zoe. 25 years ago, you caught the vision that fashion needed to be more sustainable,
Mhm.
and you turned your attention to that, quite away from what the mainstream was doing. That's quite a visionary thing to do.
Mm.
I'm going to drop some stats in a minute about where fashion is now, but back then, what was it that caused you to be able to see where we were heading?
Um, I think back then I was looking at material use. So I think I understood that um, polyester was synthetic materials were not the right materials to use. I think I did understood that then, and I understood about dyes, synthetic dyes being really damaging to the environment. Um, I don't think I really understood about consumption and what was driving consumption or the economic system that was driving things. So I think back then I looked at it from a materials perspective.
Yes, right.
And I
Okay.
think and I worked in that for a number of years and then moved into other areas once I had children and needed. It's very difficult to be a designer. We used to fly around the world back then, going to factories or researching products. I felt, you know, with young children, I didn't want to do that anymore. So
Mm.
I also felt that I thought back then, I thought that that governments would legislate. I thought that the system would provide the breaks. And I thought, well, you know, we will be able to recycle polyester. I didn't realize the issues with recycled polyester and we didn't know about microplastics back then, and things that leach into the environment, and energy use. We didn't really consider the energy bound up in the production of all of these materials. But I understood that we should be working locally and that transport was a huge issue. And I think as you learn more and you read more, once I became an educator in about 10 years ago, then you start reading more and you start trying to understand things more, and then your mind gets open to a lot more things. Greta Thunberg became very, very prominent, and I just started getting more and more worried on a personal level by that point, because I realized that things weren't changing. The industry wasn't regulating itself. Governments weren't regulating polyester, all of those things. Yeah.
I want to jump in there for the audience and drop some stats that are fairly current in terms of describing the fashion industry, the fast fashion industry that we have right now. So this is an industry that produces 100 billion and rising garments per annum. 100 billion. 70% of those are made of polyester, which is your concern. Polyester is a plastic. It's made with over 70 million barrels of oil per annum. It's made in factories that are still largely coal-powered. So we're layering on coal energy for production as well as oil for manufacturing polyester. Because prices are coming down further and further with fast fashion, and you've got dresses being sold for £4 and things like this. The quality has dropped because you can't produce quality at that low price. So margins increase, quality drops, clothes fall apart after a short amount of time wearing, and then end up in either charity shops or in landfill around the world. Being polyester, the garments can take up to 200 years to biodegrade, in which time they leak toxins into the earth and methane gases into the atmosphere. Methane being one of the fastest warming global gases, environmental gases. So that's a nightmare scenario that we're facing, and it's a colossal industry, more polluting than aviation and shipping combined. So this is for our audience to just describe the problem that we're looking at. So then you saw this coming down the track many years before we got to this point today. Let's talk about your work now and what you're focused on to redress this. And could you also let us know where you stand with regard to changing the system from inside or extra systemic change? Could you just talk us through where your work is heading?
Yeah, so I it like we know it's such a big problem. There's so many facets to it. And it's not just about polyester. It's about like polyester has enabled the huge volume because actually there's a natural limit to growing natural fibers. So if you look at the curves of the increase of garments, it's polyester because that's easy. There's access to polyester. So, but you know, that huge increase in garments is just not really necessary. And I heard a stat which says that 40% of garments made of this huge volume of billions of garments that are made are never even reach the market. So they're never even sold. So then we've got to deal with that waste as well. And we also have the issue of the clothing. Synthetically dyed natural clothing doesn't necessarily break down as well because you've got the synthetically applied finishes and chemicals. So It's such a huge, complicated area, and one person can't, we have to sort of find our focus is in that world. And I've come to the conclusion that I will focus on developing local natural fiber systems, because I think ultimately it will slow the system down, which is really important. If we have local clothing systems, we can't produce so much so quickly. It will slow things down. It will hopefully connect people to their local area. If people start becoming aware of, well, actually, we can grow linen, we can grow hemp, we have wool in abundance in the UK. They can make wonderful clothing for us if we figure out how to do it, if we relearn the skills we had from 100 years ago, if we understand that we can grow flax in our backyards, which can ultimately turn into linen. It's a very long and difficult process to turn, well, not difficult, but it's a very long process to turn a raw material, a raw fiber into a final garment, which is why they're outsourced to other places, because there's so much involved and it's so difficult to track what happens in the fashion system. Even when cotton is produced, it's really difficult for brands to track and trace every aspect of that system because there's so much involved in it, and they're always searching for the cheapest price. So garments, cotton fibers get moved from country to country before they're even made in their destination in Cambodia or wherever they're made, or in China, and then they're shipped to us. So if we are to make this system local, it will become more visible to more people. More people will be involved in it. If we grow the fiber, then we can see it, we can start to understand and start to value it more, and start to care for our clothes, and value where they come from.
Yes.
And yes, they're a natural product, and we should understand that and where that comes from.
What always surprises me is the lack of awareness of what the different fibers are, where they come from, and how they're produced.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to take it for granted. So we've both come from a fashion background, fashion design and textiles, and I've worked in corporate retail, and I take it for granted that people know the difference between the categories of fibers. But again, for the circularist audience, could you do it like a sort of 60-second like tour of a bast fiber? So with linen, the different stages. So I mean, I gave my brother some linen seeds, and I had some flax sitting on my coffee table because I just wanted it to be a conversation piece.
Yeah.
And I gave him some seeds. He said, I want to go home and grow this and see. So we can do it together if you like, but let's talk about the life cycle from flaxseed.
Because and I only learned about this fairly recently, a few years ago, and once you do learn about it, it becomes very fascinating. There's something kind of, once people get involved with flax, they kind of fall in love with it. And also hemp's also an amazing, industrial hemp, I should say, is an amazing product. So if you plant a flax seed, it takes, they're very tiny. They look exactly like linseed. If people are taking linseed for health reasons, it's the same plant. It's just that linseed is a lot shorter than flax, which is grown for fiber. So it grows taller. It grows to about 1 meter. And linseed is about half of that, but has many more seeds on it, because the oil is produced from the seed, or the seeds are used in health foods and so on. But it's the same plant. So the fiber is contained in the stem. So that takes about 100 days to grow. It's fairly easy to grow in this country. It grows in sort of temperate climates. And then you have the stalk. So you harvest it the end of its growing season when it's turned yellow and it's dry. And then you have a process called rippling, where you remove the seeds. Then you have to put the stalk. So you've got a long, thin stalk. sort of, it looks like yellow straw, which contains the fiber. You have to put that through a breaking process, which breaks and separates out the woody core. So you have the fiber left. And then that,
Retting. Is that the
oh, I
retting that
missed
you?
retting. Yes, actually, sorry. You ret it before you do that. So you have to ret it in the fields or in a
Right.
tank to yeah, allow the separation of the woody core and the fiber to happen. Then you have to
The
dry it.
environment does that to it,
The
right? The
environment
weather
can
does
do
that.
that, yeah, or you can do it in a
Right.
tank, and then you have to break it,
Yes.
and then you scutch it, which is where it sort of gets bashed with blades. And there are big machines which can do this, or you can do it by hand. And then you end up with a sort of ponytail of flax. I'm just trying to, I might even have one
I've
here.
got some upstairs. I want to go bring it. Have you got some there?
I might have some here, yeah. So
Let's
you end up,
compare our.
yeah,
Oh, I'll go get mine. We'll
get
compare
yours,
flat.
yeah.
Okay, I'm back.
Remember, I've got some more as well.
Right, let's hold up our ponytails of flax. So this is the stage before it becomes linen fibers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So look at this. And just look at the
Oh, that's
look at,
beautiful. Yeah, that's really
look at the
beautiful. That's a
goldenness
large
of it.
amount. And
Sunshine. You can literally see the sunshine in it.
I've got something here which has been half processed. So you can see here the how it starts off. So that's how
Right,
you sort of harvest it. And then this has
right.
been scutched.
Oh, there it
So
is.
yeah. And then
Beautiful.
that goes through another process where the fibers are stretched and drafted, and then it's prepared into a kind of roving. So there's a slight twist put on it, and then it's spun into yarn. And then once it's yarn, it can be used like any other yarn, but it needs different spinning machinery to say cotton, which is a much shorter staple. So the long staple yarn of linen, which is what makes it linen and gives it that beautiful drape, is requires different machinery. So we don't have any of that machinery in the UK to be able to convert. We don't have anything. We don't have the scutching machinery. We don't have the spinning machinery. We don't have any of those processing facilities here at the minute.
Is there any reason why we couldn't have that in the UK? Is it
Well,
what?
that we are working on it. So I have a group called the Bast Fiber Network, which I kind of founded just to help. There are lots of people who have these similar aims. And one of the
Yes.
things you realize when you want to start transformative change is that you need to network, you need to bring people together, you need to create these sort of non-hierarchical systems where people work together for knowledge transfer. So we have a Bast Fiber network, and there are a couple of members within that group who are developing small scale maker lab machinery to process linen, and they're getting some really great results. And it's called Fantasy Fiber Mill, and they hope to be able to, share the plans open source for this machinery, so people in their localities and places can make their own linen.
Wow.
And that's coming along really well. And in France they have all of the processing facilities, but they're huge, and so you need thousands of hectares of flax or hemp to be grown to facilitate these processing facilities. But I think where I come from is that I'd really like to see more distributed systems. So if we have smaller scale local systems, then more people get involved, more people understand the length of time it takes, more people can value the clothing and maybe become involved in the weaving or the making of the garments. And then I think that's much better, because if we create the big large scale systems, then we're recreating the same systems again, which require lots of energy, lots of steel to make machinery, all of these things. I think if we can do it in a small way, it will be, we may end up with those bigger systems, but I think we've got to grow the expertise in all of these systems first before jumping into this huge scale operations. It's much better if we develop the knowledge, because I explained it in a very simple way, but there are layers and layers and layers of knowledge to each of those stages of the system. That I think we need to learn as a country, because we've lost all of that knowledge. So we need to bring it back.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, you know what I love about this conversation, it's so close to my heart and the things that I want to do, and the contribution that I want to make to change. So I'm thinking about, we spoke about this when in our last conversation. I would very much like to create a dual sort of manufacturing system of analytics and manufacturing that will track, control, um, and record inputs. So you know, either virgin resources in, such as the flax, you know, that we grow, or shredded, recycled secondary inputs, and record the planetary impacts, all at a regional level, so that we've got a system that will ring the alarm if it's at risk of breaching any planetary boundaries. So that's what my heart's set on, which is almost it's an extension, or the next step in what you're looking at. So this is what excites me about this conversation. So let's just keep the channels open and see if we can just join up the dots to this alternative to the behemoth that is fast fashion, that's taking us all down, frankly.
Yeah. There's a very interesting project that you might be interested in New York, by a woman called Laura Sanson, and she started the New York Fiber Shed, and she's created a cooperative of textile designers and farmers to create a bioregional yarn. So the designers agree to buy, the designer cooperative buys the wool from the farmers. They create the yarn. It's from alpaca and wool yarn. So they create a beautiful yarn, which they then either use themselves or sell wholesale. And it's within their local area in New York. But they have they're called the Carbon Farm Network. So it's all, they record, there is a system that they're part of which records the carbon impact. And they've also created this system on Holochain. They are developing an app to track the transport and the logistics of where this yarn goes and how it's processed, because even within a local system, there's a lot of, you've got to collect the yarn from 4 or 5 places. You've got to, someone's got to drive there and pick it up and bring it to the process.
Yes.
We've then got to take it to the place where the yarn is made. So even within a local system, there's still a fair amount of driving around. And I know they're working on some kind of holochain app which will track this system. So yes, it's quite exciting to see that. And I think it's just important to sort of work out, when you have these systems, okay, what is this system going to do and what is its value going to be? And it's really important that farmers, who really are at the base of the system, don't have too many onerous tasks to do, because sometimes tracking the data is can be quite time consuming. And especially if you're a small farmer, it's quite often these systems, the big farmers have maybe someone who does admin or who can work on it, but a little farmer's got a million things to do in a day, and then tracking data is sometimes quite difficult. So it's really important to think about how we can work with these systems so that they're of benefit to the people who are within.
Absolutely. Wow. Yes, and it should be very light touch or no touch for the farmers, because that's not what a system should require of them at all. It's there to support the work, the effort. I want to ask you something, actually, Zoe, about So you know, so for again, for the circularist audience,
Mm,
fabrics have properties, right? They behave, they have behavior. So if,
mhm.
for example, you know, if I, so I've got something here, I've got this frock coat that I made. This is made of linen. And if I shake it, it's got a sort of behavior.
Mhm.
And linen is quite firm.
Mhm.
It's not what I would call fluid. You mentioned drape, the drape of it. It does have a drape, but it's not like a floaty silk.
No.
And I wonder, is there anything we can do with linen or wool
Mhm.
to give it a flop?
Yeah, you can create all sorts of blends of yarns. And I think if you're
Mhm.
really sensitive about, just blending um similar materials together, so linen can be blended with um cotton, or which is also a cellulose, maybe recycled cotton, but maybe, fair trade cotton. There are plenty of organic cotton farmers who will need the revenue from cotton in India, in Africa, and there's,
Yes.
we really have to be sensitive to those other areas of the world which are producing a lot of clothing, that they're not sort of devastated. But as long as these um, crops are grown in a regenerative, sensitive I prefer the term agroecological, actually, because that incorporates the social as well as the ecological, whereas
Lovely.
regenerative can mean a lot of different things.
Okay.
um but yeah, you can blend, you can do all sorts of exciting things with. There's
Mhm.
also the waste yarn, it's not waste, but when you process, say, flax or hemp, you get the long fiber, but you also get a shorter fiber, which
Right.
is called tow, which is much shorter, and so it's easier to blend with other materials. So
Mhm.
that can be blended
Right. Okay.
with cotton, with wool, to create a really interesting fabric. And what makes a fabric beautiful is the knowledge from the people who are creating the yarn. And this is what
Mm.
we really need to be aware of. I went to France I had a Churchill fellowship to explore linen and hemp systems in Europe, and I visited an amazing hemp um, company in the south of France, and they knit hemp. So this is a
Oh,
hemp t-shirt, and you can see it's got a lovely drape because it's
hemp
knitted,
t-shirt.
and this was
Can you
knitted
flop it? Can
in.
you just move it? Let's see how that
Yeah.
moves.
So, and
Yeah,
honestly, once you've worn a knitted hemp or
beautiful.
linen t-shirt, you actually don't want to go back to cotton now,
Yeah.
because it doesn't smell. You can actually do exercise in it. It won't get sweaty. It's because it regulates temperature, and it's actually pretty amazing to wear as a knitted fabric. And yeah, it has different properties. It's maybe creases a bit more, but if you accept that, it feels really nice to wear. But anyway, this yarn was made by a French knitter who creates knitted fabrics for all the luxury French brands. So this is someone who is a real expert at their craft, and he adjusted his machinery to work with the hemp yarn, and so was able to create
Interesting.
beautiful yarns. But his
Interesting.
brand's been going for years. He has so much knowledge about his craft, and that's why he was able to do it and create a
Right.
beautiful fabric.
Right.
And
I
this
mean,
is
these
why
are,
it's so important for us to develop our own systems, because it's all
yes.
about the knowledge held in the
Right.
people. And
Right.
that when things shut down, when factories close, which they do all the time, and when I was going around France, which has good fashion systems already in place, they were like, oh no, so and so is having to shut down, because it is more expensive to produce at
Yeah.
home, and people don't always
Mm.
understand and support that. But when factories shut down, you lose all of that knowledge, and that's really
Right.
important. So
Right. It's
it's
devastating, isn't
very
it?
complex.
Mm. I mean, he's an artisan. It's
Yeah,
artisanal,
it's
isn't
not
it?
done. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Clothiers are artists.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we've got fast fashion that's some completely different beast.
Yeah, it's a complete opposite. It's
I'm sure
crazy that it's being allowed to continue. You know, like
it is
Shein is
crazy.
going to be listed on the London stock market,
Can
which
you believe
is
that?
mental.
Can
Yeah.
you believe that at this stage in the crisis, where scientists are freaking out at the cliff edge that we're at,
Hmm.
and then Shein is listed on the stock exchange? I mean, where's the common? You said years ago you just believed common sense would prevail, and here we are. Where's the
It's
common
not.
sense? Where is it? It's late.
Exactly.
But
Bring on the common sense.
yeah, yeah. I want to ask you about wool because wool,
Yes.
there's a bit of an issue with wool. There's a glut of wool, and we've got farmers that can't that can sell a bag of wool for less than the price of an ice cream.
Yes. Yeah.
That that's crazy. Can
It
you
is.
talk
It is
about
crazy.
that
Yeah.
situation?
Wool's really interesting.
I love wool so
Yeah,
much.
it's
Mm.
beautiful. And honestly, I met this most amazing woman the other day who keeps Wensleydale sheep. And that,
No,
yeah, and she's in her 80s. She's been doing it for years. She makes the most, I haven't got an example here, but it is so silky and shiny. And
beautiful.
we can have Wensleydale sheep in the UK. It makes a beautiful fiber.
Mm.
But to create this beautiful fiber, that's people are used to things being soft. So, if people are used to merino wool, which is softer against the skin, but we can have lovely British wools. But I think um, farmers need to understand that it's all dependent on the breed of sheep and also
Mhm.
how the sheep are cared for. How the wool is sheared and taken off and sorted so that you
Yes,
don't have
yes.
bits of grass in it. Sheep live outside in the wild, and
Yeah, yeah, you're
you
right.
have to sort of you have to manage the wool in a certain way.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, we can totally, but that's down to, we can bring back breeding systems to get the finer wool, which is suitable for use in textile garments. But wool can be used in so many things. If it's not the fine quality to be used for yarn, it can be used in
Right,
insulation, it can be used
right,
in bedding, it can
right.
replace plastic, any kind of plastic filling
Feelings.
materials.
Yes.
But until plastic is more expensive than naturally
Right.
materials,
Mm.
or until businesses are incentivized to not use that, then they're going to go for the cheaper option. But I mean, the brilliant thing with wool is that you can even waste wool, you can turn it into compost. So I've heard of schemes where you get a sort of, it's like a chipper. It's not a chipper, but it's like a chipper for waste wool, which then transforms the waste wool into pellets, which then can be sold for quite a high value because they're so good in the soil as compost, these sort of wool pellets, because they hold water, they hold protein,
Ah,
they break down, they're really good for the soil. So
right.
I always say that to people when they say, we've got all this wool, I don't know what to do with it. It's like, get a wool chipper and then sell bags of compost because people pay a lot of money for that. So,
Yes.
there are,
Yes.
ways, whilst we learn about keeping wool for fiber, which is
Yes.
suitable for garments, we can, yeah.
Yes. Also, wool matting is used in cleanup operations for
Mm,
oil spillage in the sea. It works
really?
a treat
Yeah.
there for absorbing it. The
Mm,
oil adheres to it
mm,
really
yeah.
well. I mean, that's the beauty of natural products. It's not a it's not that many steps for before it returns to something very useful because the natural world
It
is already,
provides for
it's
us.
designed for
Yeah.
interface with so many different other natural
Yeah.
products.
And things like, well,
Whereas,
people worry about, oh, is it fire retardant? Well, natural materials are naturally fire retardant, but we have all these rules and regulations, and we don't trust that actually there
yes,
are natural
right.
things. Like my husband is he's really into cars. Which obviously he isn't anymore, but if we do have a van, and you can use lanolin on the base of the car, which stops the van rusting, and it smells like sheep, but it's an amazing
Ah,
product which
wow.
protects the cars from rust. So you don't always have to use um chemicals, and there are many,
Right.
many natural solutions. Like I make my own hair gel out of flax seeds, which sounds crazy,
Oh,
but
do
my hair is
you?
like huge and big. And I just boil up flax seeds. It makes a kind of gel. It takes 5 minutes, and then yeah, it's a natural gel. And there's so many things like that that we've lost the knowledge of that we can
It's
do.
amazing. I'm gonna try that. I've got actually a bag of flax seeds here. I don't know what to do with them.
You have to keep it in the fridge. It doesn't last long. That's probably why we don't do it, because these things, you need preservatives if you're to make things last. But
So is that a holding gel or a conditioning gel or both?
it
The
works, honestly, it works just like a gel. So if you look up
oh,
flax gel, a lot of people with very curly hair use it. It's
which
amazing.
I naturally have.
Yeah. Honestly, try it. It's great.
I will. I will. Oh, how cool.
I'll send you my
Cool.
little recipe.
Oh, lovely. I look forward to that. Thank you. So we've had quite the exploration here,
Mhm.
and I'm pretty sure there's so much information that will be interesting to the Circularists viewers. What else can we tell them? Is there anything else you'd like to add to this
Yeah. And
festival of information?
yes,
Mm.
my where I've got to with how I'd like to work with the system is that I would like food and fiber to be said in the same breath. So people talk about transforming food systems, and we're on the way with that, local food, people understanding where our food comes from, eating
Mhm.
healthy, being aware of the nutrients in organically grown food is completely different to the nutrients found, or the lack of nutrients found, in conventionally grown food. And we're starting to realize that it's actually really bad for our health to eat food that's been farmed in that way.
Right.
But, for people to start integrating, people who are working on food systems start saying food and fiber, because they are interlinked. They're
Yes.
grown in the same fields.
Right.
Fiber can come from animals, from,
Yes.
leather is a fiber. They're all byproducts or co-products, we like to call them, of the meat system.
Yes.
Everything
Yes.
is disenfranchised, and it's really hard to track and trace where all these products come from. And so if we start thinking in systems, I would say it's food and fiber systems, and
Lovely.
building systems. So integrating with building materials, they're all related. And if we can work on this together, it becomes less about fashion and trends and fashion driving
Right.
things. It
Right.
becomes about what can be grown within a local system.
I just love this. This is so close to my heart. I just love that. Um, so important for building a new way of living and doing things.
Exactly. That's what it's about. That's what it's all
Mm.
about.
I want
And
to ask you one more thing before we
mm,
close off, Zoe. Bamboo. What are
mm,
your thoughts about bamboo? Another plant fiber. I
mm.
know that there's a closed loop method of production. There's the harmful chemicals polluting version. Could you share your thoughts on bamboo as a fabric fiber?
As a fiber, I mean, bamboo is very fast growing, and as a fiber, it's a cellulosic fiber. So the system is how you produce viscose. So once you've transformed the chemical, it becomes a viscose based fabric. So
Right,
it's like
right.
tensile. It's like anything, you can make. Viscose is breaking down the cellulose. So they're breaking down the bamboo, turning it into a sort of chemical goop of cellulose. So its properties, I
Pulpy
think,
mass, is it?
are the
Wet
same as,
pulpy.
yeah, the wet pulp. So I don't actually know whether that is then biodegradable and compostable at the end of its life.
Mhm,
I'm
mhm,
not
mhm,
clear on that. I think some people
mhm,
say it's not, and it's
mhm,
so I'm a bit vague on that, but I don't
mhm.
really focus on it, because but growing bamboo and cellulosic systems involve chemicals rather than, I'm more interested
Yes,
in mechanical production, because I think it's a
right.
closer to the land.
Yes.
But yeah, it's not saying no to any of these things. It's just exploring, okay, what are the impacts? How large is the supply chain? Do
Hmm.
we need to develop these materials? There's so much fabric in the world. I'm more interested in developing the systems for sort of future resilience rather than developing, we need more fabric and clothing right now because we don't. We've got so much, we should use what we have. So I'm more interested in, okay, maybe 20, 30 years down the line, how do we have healthy
Right.
systems in the
Right.
UK? So I'm more interested in that because I think it will
I
take
am.
a long
Yes.
time.
Yes.
I think we should
Yes.
recycle, we should use what we have in the
Right.
system because there's so much of it.
I'm of that same opinion. You know, we've got a glut of clothing in the world. We're producing 100 billion garments a year and rising, and there is plenty, but we need to think about 100 years out from now. How are we going to wear and obtain clothing and recycle it and
Exactly.
all of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Zoe, thank you so much for joining me on the Circularists. This has been a fascinating exploration, and I'm sure it will be for the Circularist audience. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would ask of the Circularist audience? Is there a site that you think it would be worth them going to have a look? What would be an ask or a request?
Yeah, I would say I work with a group called Fashion Act Now, and we are about to launch a website called Our Common Market. So that's ourcommon.market. And it will be trying to make visible all these smaller alternative fashion systems. So it's creating what we call a fashion commons. So all people who are working on alternative systems in ways which are not extractive, so not to extract profit, but which are there to benefit the land, to benefit local people, to benefit community. So I would suggest having a look at that. And also just think about your clothing. Just think, where did this come from? What is it made from? Who made it? And just ask yourself if you're happy with all of those things. I think it's just about knowledge. If you know who's made it or you know where it's come from and you're comfortable with that situation, then that's great. But maybe just start thinking about your clothes a bit more.
Right.
And if in doubt, buy secondhand.
Wonderful. So Gilbertson, thank you so much for joining me on the Circularists. Let's talk again. Let's keep the channel open and keep the conversation going. But wonderful to hear about your work and your passions. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great. Thank you for having me.
But that was fantastic.
Great.
I'm going to stop recording now.